You can become very lazy in the work where you're like, just pray about it.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to sit with you in this difficulty because it's hurting me. So I'm going to avoid, in the same way that I hear clients who want to avoid doing the work, working on your depression by actually using these CBT techniques. You don't need to pray about it more. You need to do these techniques that I've given you.
Welcome to Deal with Dymphna. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Lauren. And today we are talking about over-spiritualization and mental health. And we're just talking about the impacts essentially of over-spiritualizing mental health and how that can be negative for people.
Yeah, Lauren, how have you seen mental health be over-spiritualized?
I've noticed that sometimes people will come in and they are on a mission. I call this the fix myself mission. They can begin to over-spiritualize therapy. Like therapy becomes this their next spiritual avenue for perfection, escape from suffering, what you name it.
How do you see that play out in therapy? I'm really curious.
The thing that I see happening in therapy is there's sort of this subconscious demand of me as a therapist to fix. That's how I experience it. It's I'm supposed to,
and especially because you're a Catholic therapist. Is that kind of what they look?
Yes.
They're like spiritual guru who.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If I just go to therapy and I exercise this thing and I do this thing, then I'll be fixed. My problems that I had as a child because of the wounds that my parents gave me, I'll be fixed. And they'll often be bringing in all of the other things that they litanies of the heart is a really common it's a sort of inner family systems approach. They'll bring some of that in, and there's just this demand to be made better, as though that you can ever even accomplish that in this lifetime. And it's done in this way that's it's disguised as a spiritual pursuit, but it's actually this control mechanism. I want to fix myself. It's this. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. This aspect of, I have to get all my ducks in a row. I have to be fixed before. And this is something that I've seen, that people feel like I need to fix myself before I can achieve the next milestone.
Yeah.
I need to fix myself so that I can get married.
Yeah.
And I tell people, marriage is two broken people entering marriage. If you wait till you're perfect until you get married, then you can wait till you're in heaven, right? You will marry someone. You as an imperfect person, you're on your journey of, healing and growing in holiness, right? With your spouse. And right, one of the main purposes of marriage is helping you get to heaven and growing in holiness. So you're not supposed to be perfect when you get married. You're supposed to, grow with your spouse. So that's just one example where, what I've seen where people feel is that kind of what you mean? I have to get fixed before I can enter a healthy relationship, before I can have children, because I don't want to pass on my hurt, which is, granted, there's some truth to that. Maybe you do have things in your life where you feel I need to work on this before I feel I can open myself up to a relationship, or I want to work on this before I want to have children who I want to be loving towards. So I think there can be that, but if it's fully I have to be 100% perfect and fixed before I can
be happy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And be happy. Yeah. Right.
The other way that I see over-spiritualization and therapy play out is that I see patients with very practical problems come in and they begin applying spiritual exercises to, there's almost this spiritual virtue signaling of we just need to pray about that more. So let's say I have a couple and they're having financial issues. Well, we just need to pray about these financial issues more and it'll get better. No. You already pray about your financial issues a lot. If that was the case, you wouldn't be here. Yes, you do need to pray and you should pray about your finances. Cool, do that. Also, though, the fact, make a budget, but you need a spreadsheet and you need maybe you need to talk to a financial advisor and you need to do practical things, not just foist all of your pragmatic boots on the ground solutions onto God's you can't voice those things onto God. Like you're supposed to tend to the things that you're
Yeah.
responsible for. I also can see it in and I'm going to be super curious to hear about like if you've seen this as well, where it's like when people begin talking about their interpersonal dynamics and they might say something along the lines of like, well, maybe I would have a better relationship if I like prayed about it more, or I like did this spiritual practice. And it's like, actually there are just pragmatic and practical solutions to this issue that you're already doing a good enough job praying.
What I'm hearing you say is, but tell me if I'm getting this right, is almost like, so the two ways that you have shared of how you see therapy being over-spiritualized is almost like two extremes. Like the one extreme is this idea that essentially I need to work really hard to be fixed, to be good, to be better. It's all on me. I have to just work harder and do better, which kind of leaves God out of the picture. And the other extreme is this complete passivity of, Lord, you need to do this, but I'm not going to go to action. So this, because obviously there's a balance to it, right? Yeah. There is some truth to both, right? Like we are called to action. We are responsible. We are, supposed to be like participating in our life and in the salvation of the world. So we're supposed to, participate, but also we're supposed to rely on God and not just have this idea of I need to fix it. I need to do the right thing. Then we go into, that can sometimes lead to like OCD, scrupulosity, right? If we're like, I need to be better, I need to do this, which like you were saying, it can kind of be covered up by this spirituality of, well, I need to just like pray the rosary every day and I need to do it perfectly. I need to say the right prayer and then I will be healed. It's like, well, then you're really trying to do it yourself. You're not actually saying the prayer and trusting that God will work. So is that kind of what you're saying, that it's these like two extremes, that either you're trying to like do it all yourself, or you're just saying, I can't do anything, I'm just going to be super passive, and we have to find that middle ground. And some things we genuinely, all we can do is pray, but other things it's like there is something that God is calling you to action.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've like identified those perfectly. You recapped those. Have you ever seen anything like that in the work that you do with people?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I work with a lot of clients who struggle with OCD, and 100% that's something that I see so often, and especially my Catholic clients who struggle with scrupulosity, OCD, where it's under that cover of, for example, like confession. Like I need to do the right confession. I need to be a good enough person. I need to be, good enough so that I'm free of sin, so that I can be fixed, that I can be good. I need to make sure I'm not selfish. I'm doing the right things, under that mantle of like, I want to be, like perfect, like God is perfect, right? Like the passage. But really it's being so like self-sufficient. That's really how I've seen it played out, versus like realizing like, you can't save yourself and you need God. I've seen the over-spiritualization of mental health where people kind of reject therapeutic techniques because they say, oh, I don't need therapy, I just have to pray more. And they kind of negate this idea that, God has given us a brain and common sense, and God has given us creativity and curiosity, right? Yeah. So that as humans, we have, done research in medicine, and we learn how to fly, and, there's technology and all those things. I think God has given us brains and the curiosity and the creativity to figure these things out. And I think the same goes for therapeutic methods, right? That we've been able to like do research on the brain and understand how the brain works and understand how emotions affect us and how past experiences affect us and what ways, there can be healing. And I think if somebody over-spiritualizes that and rejects those helpful tools and methods, then I think that can be really detrimental to someone's mental health, because like you're like rejecting, all these wonderful tools and techniques that, we as humans have come up with that, obviously, if they shouldn't contradict Catholic teaching, right? And I think there are definitely, in one video you mentioned like the manifesting, that definitely, I would say that should, stay away from that. That's, so not everything that humans, so again, there's truth in that, right? Like not everything that we humans come up with is, is good, is of the Lord. But also at the same token, not everything that humans come up with is bad.
Right.
So that's how I've seen it. So actually, at least in my experience, a lot of people who have that kind of like over-spiritualization of mental health, of rejecting therapeutic techniques. I guess I never seen them in my office because they would not choose to come to
Yeah.
therapy. But I mean, have you seen that
In my office? I haven't seen that, like what you're describing of like total rejection of therapeutic techniques, obviously, because I also think that they probably wouldn't come. But
or be very skeptical of me because they know I'm a therapist.
exactly, yeah. But I've heard it in like regular conversation. I'm never really offended by that. Find myself more curious about like what would compel a person to reject like just hard science. And I always suspect that that's the result of deep woundedness that doesn't want to be probed. A fear of confronting the skeletons in your own closet. Which, to be fair, I don't think our generation, millennials, have as much of an aversion to that sort of thing as older generations. Like boomers, I think the trope is that people of an older generation have a more resistance. They're more treatment resistant.
I've actually noticed, especially the Gen Z generation, to be really open to therapy. Have you noticed that?
Like maybe even interestingly, like
yes, like everyone talks about their therapist, and that they, not that that's bad. Please, share with your friends and your close ones that you're, what you love about your therapist. But right there can be this like display of like, like their own. I mean, that's a whole other topic, right? Of like social media and like talking, very much sharing, opening up all your mental health things on social media, making yourself vulnerable, which I think that's kind of like a Gen Z thing. But
there's a whole spectrum, a whole gamut.
But the positive, yes, I think the Gen Z generation is more open and less skeptical towards therapy.
Yeah. I find that like when people are just completely treatment resistant, I suspect that it has something to do with, or maybe they really just they haven't had terribly deep suffering that they've been unable to process, and they just don't see how it would have been helpful for themselves. I don't know. That's also a possibility.
Or they've had bad experiences with a therapist.
Yeah, that's also a possibility.
In what ways, Lauren, have you seen over-spiritualization of therapy being actually detrimental to someone's well-being or to their healing?
With the first example that I started with around seeing therapy as another avenue to your like spiritual perfection. Because we've gotten into the territory now these days where there are a lot of Catholic and Christian psychologists and counselors who talk about blending spiritual practices and mental health practices. There's tons of podcasts about this. We're doing that. And so actually I think that's why it's kind of a relevant topic. But with that, there can be people who perhaps they experienced like a tremendous amount of childhood trauma and pain. And their whole desire is to be healed. And that's good. That's a good desire, to be healed. But when you have that desire like by the neck and you're like this about it and you're like, God, heal me. And like that itself, that attitude, that disposition it's a disposition of anxiety and control. And in and of itself makes it more difficult for the natural healing that would just arise from letting it go come about. I'm not saying it's impossible. God can do miraculous things. I am just saying, and I'm not saying you're even responsible for letting it go. Cause like I feel a bit about saying that the way that I do about like when people tell me like, as soon as you stop wanting to be married, you'll be married. Like I hate that advice. I think it's such stupid advice.
Stop trying to become pregnant and you'll become pregnant.
Exactly. Yeah. All of that. That's not quite what I'm saying. What I am saying is the act of grasping onto something just even limits our perspective and our ability to perceive it as happening. It's like it just makes you feel anxious in that moment. It makes you feel uptight. It makes you feel, and so that is one way that I'm like, sometimes my thought is, I think you should like stop coming to therapy. Like I think you should just like release this stuff, like let it go, like stop, like let it go.
Work on accepting
this is where you're at.
That you're always going to be broken until you get to heaven.
Yeah.
It's because you need a savior. I think the idea that I can fix myself, or or maybe with the help of a therapist, I can be fixed, or with the help of the right prayer or the right book or the correct whatever. This idea that I can work my way to heaven.
Yeah.
I can of my own power and my own will be good enough and be perfect enough, which again, I think drives from that anxiety of what if I fail at, like, what if I'm not good enough? I need to work harder, which then we get again into like the whole like scrupulosity, obsessively, like by the neck, right? I think that's a really good image.
Yeah. And even like, as you say, like work my way to heaven. Sometimes these people's emphasis isn't even on necessarily like earning a spot in heaven. It's more on an emphasis on like the basis of like wanting to be perfectly content and happy and not suffer. And in that way, that's what your statement is exactly correct. It's like, I want to work my way to like feeling like I'm in heaven, where I have like total peace, total joy, total happiness. And like the reality is like this life just like is filled with suffering, and you're not doing it wrong because it hurts.
Yeah.
I wonder how many times we hear that message, like in the spiritual therapeutic world. How often are we really delivering the message like, just because this hurts doesn't mean you're doing it wrong? I think we can focus so much on trying to help people and relieve their suffering and pain that we forget that suffering and pain just are a part of life.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong because you're experiencing that.
Right. That's so good. Yeah, I was thinking that passage, like, be joyful in all circumstances. Doesn't mean that the circumstances are awesome.
Right.
Like, right. Like, you know, I think maybe people can take that and say, well, as Christians, I should never like suffer or never struggle with things. That means I'm not doing the Christian thing the right way. Like, no. The point is that we should strive to have hope and choose, and through that hope comes the joy, right?
Yeah.
Through the hope in Jesus Christ comes the joy, not that we pretend like we're not suffering.
Yeah, like St. Paul says, it is necessary that we should suffer much to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Amen.
And so I think it's my job to offer techniques to allow people to receive healing that God may have in store for them. I desire to do that. I desire to see people's lives improve. I desire to see people be happy. It's also my job to be able to sit with the fact that I have absolutely no power over this person.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no capacity to change their life for them. And there are some forms of suffering that my only job, as when someone brings it in, is to sit with them.
Yeah. Right.
And be sad with them.
Yes. And not try to gloss over it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've kind of talked about now how people can over-spiritualize their own mental health, but I think you were kind of segueing now into how actually therapists can fall into the trap of over-spiritualizing therapy.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can touch on that too, of what kind of warning signals or things where that can get really tricky. And I think one thing is, right, like when a client comes in to therapy and shares their genuine struggle, and a therapist would say, well, either like, oh, you just have to like pray more about that, which again, that's in and of itself not a bad advice, right? Like, have you taken that to prayer, or like, but also, or saying things like, for example, if I don't know, if you're struggling with like a loss of like a child, like, oh well, you'll see them again in heaven. Like, we have that hope, we have that joy. That is true, but like you were saying, Lauren, that person needs to like find acceptance of the circumstance and suffering, and have someone sit in that. And I think, right, like the temptation is, because it is always harder to sit with someone in their pain than to try to like make it all go away. I mean, I think all of us have that instinct of like, if we see someone, I mean, it comes from a good place of, I don't want to see you suffering, therefore I want to sprinkle some hope and joy and some happy Bible passages on that to make you just feel all better. I think that comes from that, maybe that place of like insecurity of like, this is really like, it's painful to see you in pain. But I think, Lauren, exactly what you were saying, I think oftentimes as therapists or as someone who's walking with a loved one, right, the greatest gift you can give them is to just sit with them in their pain and not try to like make it go away. I mean, I think that's like that next step of, obviously like, we shouldn't stay in the suffering, and there's that point where it becomes wallowing, but not right when you're fresh in the suffering. It's not wallowing, it's you're still in the suffering. And then comes the point when, people might be ready to, dive more, move towards that hope and that joy. But I think the over-spiritualization from therapists could be to, in every situation, try to get people to turn away from their suffering and look towards the hope. Which again, I think there's that aspect of like, like I'm thinking of Jesus and Peter walk on the water, and Jesus says, "Look to me, not the waves." So I think there's definitely that idea of, but then are you looking to Jesus and relating your suffering to Jesus? Like, are you still allowing yourself to feel that suffering without trying to happy spiritualize it away, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Because I think also there's that danger of missing actual like clinical diagnoses too, right? If someone talks about how they aren't are finding it harder to find joy in things that they used to find pleasure in, and then just trying to like again like sprinkle some happiness and hope on that, and actually missing that. Oh, this person's actually slipping into depression. Right. This is actually, like we actually need to address the depression, and not just, getting you to, happy clappy be on Sundays again. So I think, those are the things that I think I see like a danger for therapy, which again, I can see how that would be that temptation, because obviously, I want to see all my clients live in the joy and hope of Jesus Christ. Yeah. I want that for them, but there's a time and a place when we need to just sit with people in their suffering. That's what Jesus did with people, right? He went to the sick and he just was with them. But yeah, have you, like, what things do you see where therapists might, fall into that trap of over-spiritualizing, therapy with their clients?
Yeah. I think you can fall into the trap of doing that in a few ways, and I think they relate to the same ways that the same traps a patient can fall into, because we're people too, which is it's all up to me. It's all up to me to fix this person. And I see I see that a lot in a lot of helping professions, actually, where it's like people are problems to fix, and it's my job to fix them, which is a really ill way to look at people. And I think the therapists who think this way would, if they were the patient, fall into the camp of therapy is another method for me to reach spiritual perfection here on earth. Yeah. And then I think there's the other end of the spectrum where I think it can be really difficult as a therapist to sit in the pain. Yes. If you don't have a way to offload your sorrow. And by offload, I mean, like, do you have a healthy community life? Do you have good interpersonal relationships? Do you, have activities that you enjoy, hobbies, but also do you have an active prayer life where, like, at the end of the day, when you have a rough session, you can go, God, I literally don't know what to do about this. You gotta help me out. Yeah. Right. You gotta help me out, dude. Right. You gotta help me see how this is gonna be okay, because I'm so sad for this person. And also, like, surrendering them to the Lord and realizing that, like, Jesus is the ultimate true healer. And I think God uses, caretakers, therapists to bring about healing. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, lifting our clients up to Jesus and saying, take it from here, like, work through me, but you are the ultimate healer. And it's that fine balance, right, of therapy and counseling. We've talked about this in other videos of how, like, religion is just like such a holistic way of looking at a person, whether it's Christian religion or, like, just like that we're spiritual beings. And so obviously there's that fine balance of, yes, like, that is part of it, right? We're not saying, like, spiritual stuff is here and therapy's here, right? It's that balance, but, like, like, you don't want to fall into, like, one of the two extremes. Right. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that after a time of not being able to offload your pain, you burn out. And so you can become very lazy in the work, where you're like, just pray about it. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to sit with you in this difficulty because it's hurting me. So I'm going to avoid, in the same way that I hear clients who want to avoid doing the work of like getting your finances together and working on your depression by actually using these CBT techniques. You don't need to pray about it more. You need to do these techniques that I've given you. Right. And so I think that is where I see therapists falling into the same traps that patients can. Obviously, the solution is balance, which is really what we've saying. Like, all, lies and the truth, like, they exist on a spectrum, and the opposite ends are always lies. What's hidden in the middle is the paradoxical truth, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that, yes, spirituality is an essential component of being a human, and therapy is an avenue in which it can lend itself to helping a human along on that journey. But it's not a way to like fix a person.
Yeah.
People aren't supposed to be fixed. And so it's a way to like walk alongside someone and show them love, really, is what it is. And so I think that is the correct approach. But I mean, I shouldn't say, like, there's not just like one only, like that doesn't encapsulate every single approach that a person can take. But I think it's one healthy approach to thinking about treating patients.
Yeah. And I think everything that we've said, I think, does not negate that, the fact that sometimes in working with clients, you might reach the point where it's like, where even like we as therapists would feel kind of what you were saying, like helpless, of like, this seems like a really hopeless situation where, where we can come to the point of saying, we really, like, we need a miracle. Like, we need to really just pray into this. Like there are situations where it's like, this seems like a really tricky situation. Like, we need to pray about this. And, I mean, I do this with clients who have said that they would like me to pray with them, or have openly shared that. And, where we get to the point where we're like, let's just pray together.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not fooling myself into like, I know I have all the answers, or I know, there are moments when it's like, I mean, that shouldn't be like the last. Obviously, prayer is not the last resort. Like, don't be like, I got this, God, and then I'll call you when I need you. That's not what I'm saying. But I think there really are genuinely, and that's not a balance, right? There are genuinely situations where we are at our loss, right? There's like, it seems like there's like no way forward. Let's bring this to the Lord, right? So we're not speaking against that either.
Yeah.
Right. But it's, it's definitely that balance, which can be sometimes hard to discern. But again, I think with prayer for wisdom, for the Holy Spirit to guide us in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you help someone discern maybe if they're falling into one camp or another? What do you think would be like good advice for either end of the spectrum?
Yeah. I think one indicator of over-spiritualization of treatment can be is progress stalling. I would think about, well, first of all, I would think, is there kind of some kind of resistance to treatment? And then that could be like, is there either the person trying to just like work really hard, like white knuckle it, and so they're not actually just allowing the healing to happen, they're not allowing God into it, or the other side where they're just becoming so passive that they're also not making progress because they're not doing their part. So I think if I feel like there's like all of a sudden there's like no progress, I would say that that's definitely one indicator. Trying to think. Really good question. I don't know if I have like a one-off answer to that though.
That's fair.
What about you?
I think I would have a patient begin to assess whether or not this action is coming from a place of either avoidance or desire for control. I would start doing some just like psychodynamic stuff. I would be like, and I'd do some Socratic questioning to figure out like, is this, where is this desire coming from? I think it starts to become obvious when to a therapist, like what's going on as far as over-spiritualization. I think it can start to become obvious when the type of person who's maybe trying really hard to control their healing, when those answers start to become like frustration without acknowledgement of like progress, without the ability to sit in any changes that occur, and acknowledge them. And I think on the other end, when the answers are just consistently like, why am I not making progress? Like, God isn't doing this for me. So essentially like victimhood, that would be like what might be some of my indicators.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. When someone is starting to get really like resentful towards God, it's like, why isn't God doing his part?
Yeah. A feeling of helplessness, I would identify.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like you feel helpless.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I would just say, where is that coming from? And when have you felt helpless? And like, what does that remind you of? And who does that remind you of?
Isn't the psychodynamic approach so wonderful? I love it.
Yeah. Very revelatory.
I love my CBT stuff, but also the psychodynamic is like, yeah.
The marriage of those two things. Is,
Yes, I agree. Well, we hope you found this helpful. I definitely found this super interesting,
very
inspiring.
We hope that you would like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you can see any new videos that we send out.
Until next time, have a good week. God bless.
God
Bye.
bless.